Welcome back, Honors. All right. Buckle it up, sit on down, and let's talk about Rome moving into the Empire period, right? Under, of course, their new leader, Octavian, and his new triumvirate, the second triumvirate, including himself, Mark Antony, who was, of course, Caesar's most trusted ally, and then Marcus Lepidus, this other, third-rate JV player. He has a goatee. It's not acceptable. All right, so, anyway, he's not that important, but just a quick review of the stuff that we've talked about, right? So, of course, Caesar has now been stabbed. It is now, of course, up to his grandnephew, who gets adopted by his granduncle, as also another Gaius Julius Caesar, but he becomes Octavian Gaius Julius Caesar, right? So, and he has now been tasked with going out there, hunting down Brutus and Cassius, murdering them, and then coming on back to Rome. Now, of course, something I forgot to discuss in E for some reason, I guess I just slipped my mind, is that, of course, to make this happen for Octavian and the new triumvirate to go and actually take over these two guys and oust Brutus and Cassius because they're over in Greece, they got to raise money, right? So the hard part about fundraising is finding legitimate ways to do it. So Octavian realizes that, you know what we could do? We could just kill all those senators that didn't like Caesar, and then that way they'll the ones that are replaced will like us, and we'll just be awesome about it. So remember I talked about how he elevates Caesar to god level because of the comment at the games. At those same games, he had several, over 100 people sacrificed, all senators, right? So in a religious ceremony. And then also, not to mention the fact that he put a bounty out on some ridiculous number of people that were all anti-Caesar, 2,000 people. And every single time one of them was a senator, the bounty may have been paid right after somebody else had killed them. Let's say hypothetically Jaden goes out there and kills one of the other, Sixtus Pompey, even though he's not a senator, he's a naval officer, but still, she goes out there and does it. Guess where all of that senator's money goes? It goes to the state, right? So Octavian would only have to pay a little bit of money for the bounty, but then got to keep the entire financial holdings of that senator if they died while a senator, right? So he just turned murder into a fundraiser. How crazy is that, right? So Octavian is a very disputed figure, right? And eventually, after they hunt down Brutus and Cassius, and they track them all the way down to Greece, and they find them, and then at the Battle of, I think it's Pelaia? Yeah, so they destroy them. Brutus and Cassius both kill themselves, right? So now, the thing about it is, once this whole thing goes down, the second triumvirate decides that they're going to try and split the empire up into 3 different places and kind of rule it effectively on their own, right? So Octavian is going to take the western part of the empire, the nice part with France and Spain and Italy and old Gaul territory and all that good stuff. And then Mark Antony gets Greece, the Jerusalem area, and of course it's right next to Cleopatra's empire of Egypt, which is one of their allies, and that's where Mark Antony and Cleopatra end up falling in love with one another, and they set out to try and take Augustus's empire back from him. So the second triumvirate ends up breaking down. Oh, and Lepidus gets this little squirtly little area of northern Africa that nobody wants, right? So it's really only 2 guys, but of course it's 3. And so Lepidus gets his land and armies taken from him by Octavian legally, right? Since he's technically the dictator at the time. And then, they're all 3 dictators, but he just pwned Marcus Lepidus and takes all his money. And a war is going to break out between Octavian, Mark Antony, and Cleopatra, right? Now, not a 3-way war, but Octavian versus Mark Antony and Cleopatra, right? Mark Antony and Cleopatra have some slight advantages. They are the breadbasket for Rome whenever they need food. They actually go to Egypt. They also happen to be a pretty large naval force, right? And they also have a large army. But eventually, Octavian's going to beat them in this war, and he's going to claim Egypt as his own, right? So, and creating a new Rome that surrounds the entire Mediterranean. So Egypt is officially conquered by Octavian when he defeats Mark Antony in battle. Mark Antony also actually kills himself, right? Because of course, if no one wants to live with the shame of like losing like that war, he kills himself. And then when Cleopatra finds out that her lover Mark Antony has killed himself, she actually grabs an Egyptian asp out of a basket, and the snake is in her hand, and she just slams it to her chest and forces the snake to bite her, and she kills herself too. Of course, in the long run, she also had her sister strangled to death, but like, you know, you win some, you lose some. All right, so like eventually Octavian beats them and creates a new Roman Empire that surrounds the entire Mediterranean, right? And then eventually Octavian's going to come back and he's going to become dictator in 27 BC. Now, the big thing about Octavian is he's kind of like, remember, he's a political genius, all right? So I don't approve of murder. I don't approve of sacrificing people. I don't approve of using death as a fundraiser, but if you're going to do it, I mean, do a good job at it, right? And the man did a good job. He also comes back, and then he turns Rome back over to the Republic, right? So he doesn't become the first, like, it's hard to explain. But what he has himself elected as, first of all, he changes his name to Augustus, right? Meaning respected one or revered one, right? And then he elects himself as the first man of the Senate. He calls himself the Principate, and he elects this thing known as the Principate system, right? Where he is the first amongst equals. He calls himself basically like the first citizen of Rome. Now, ironically enough, that's not very different from this idea of calling someone an emperor, right? Now, the word emperor comes from the word imperator, which is a title given to a general after a successful military campaign. And over time, that word got changed into into emperor, right? And eventually, he was referred to not as the Principate anymore, but the imperator, and he becomes the first true emperor of Rome, right? Even though he never called himself that, we all know as historians that Augustus is the first true emperor of Rome. He's also a genius, and now that he's liquidated the Senate and killed all the people that didn't like Caesar, one of them happens to be one of the most famous philosophers in all of history. It's a guy named Cicero, right? I'm sure in Latin y'all have read some stuff by Cicero before. And Cicero happens to be a Stoic philosopher who believes in the idea of like ruling with authority. And he absolutely hates the idea of an emperor, and he loves the idea of the Senate. And he also was anti-Caesar. So Augustus has him killed and then has his head hung from a rope where the senators go to meet every day. Like, so that is insane, right? He's a very violent guy. And ironically enough, he then claims his new time period to be called the Pax Romana, or the Roman era of peace, right? So this lasts for 200 years, right? 200 years of time after Augustus, so until about 227 BC, right before, of course, the crisis of the 3rd century, or like the crisis of the, right up to the crisis of the 3rd century. It's considered like a golden age, right? So Augustus actually elects himself this imperator. He becomes the first true emperor of Rome, and under his leadership, he starts creating amazingly, like, really, really neat things. Like, I mean, like, he kind of, like, convinces Rome that he's good for them, right? So he ends up creating a constitutional monarchy, this idea where a king or a leader, right, like himself being this principate, this first citizen, must work with other governing bodies, like the Senate, and follow the rules of other citizens. So he's created new laws that were passed that were supposed to give citizens more rights, allowing more people to vote, expanding citizenship to other people. He also creates the very first census. He actually takes a count of how many people live in the empire and how many of them actually are considered citizens versus slaves or conquered people or whatever, right? So roads are going to be expanded, which roads, by the way, the word infrastructure is other, like, the different assemblances of, not assemblances, but different systems of moving items through an empire quickly and easily. So he has roads expanded, and he also has the aqueducts expanded, right? And he also builds new government buildings, like this is a great one, right? This one down. He has the Forum of Augustus built, and then he also has the Pantheon built. He didn't actually even build the Pantheon. His buddy Marcus Agrippa built the Pantheon, and it is one of the nicest things you have ever seen in your entire life. I'm going to show you a picture here in about 2 seconds. He also creates the very first professional army, And he creates this thing known as the Praetorian Guard, right? So the Praetorian Guard becomes like the secret service for the emperors. The Praetorian Guard's also crazy because they end up being some of the main history writers of the rest of Rome. Because if ever there was an emperor that was making the Senate mad, the Praetorian Guard could be bribed to kill them while they slept at night, right? So the Praetorian Guard does some crazy stuff as time goes on. Now, this is really, really neat. These are another thing that Augustus actually had built. Speaking of public and government buildings, this is a toilet, all right? So, like, this is actually one of the very, very first public bathrooms that was actually created, and it was inside of some of, like, Augustus's public baths, right? Public bathhouses were a big thing expanded under Augustus. So the big phrase, like, write this down real quick, a big phrase about Augustus is that he found Rome a city of bricks, and he left it a city of marble, right? So, like, the idea that he enhanced Rome, right? This is the men's bath in Rome, right? Here's the crazy thing about, like, of course, the toilet's awesome because, like, plumbing. Yay. You go to the bathroom, it leaves, right? We all like that stuff, right? So this is really neat, though, because this is a public bathhouse. So, like, anybody in the public could actually attend these bathhouses. Typically, it was only patricians, but still. And they would attend these bathhouses. This water was heated. It was like a hot tub. And it was kept clean by adding salt to it, right? And it was heated like a hot tub because there was actually a space between the bottom of the bath and the floor, right? So, and slaves would walk underneath that space and light fires underneath the stone that held the water, heating it to a bathable temperature, right? So this is the women's bath in some of the public bathhouses that were created by Augustus. Like, look at how beautiful that is. A city clothed in marble, right? So, and then this, of course, is an aqueduct, right? The aqueducts are systems of bringing fresh water to the city of Rome, right? It actually works as in, like, there's a mountain, like, over on this side, like, so it grabs fresh water elevated on mountain peaks, and then just uses a gradual decline and just runs it like a river straight on down to the city, right? So, like, some of these aqueducts are still, like flopping around Rome, too. Like, you can actually, if you, like, were to go to anywhere that Rome controlled, you can sometimes find ancient aqueducts that are still standing. In Hungary, there's some ancient aqueducts that I saw that are still standing. Jerusalem has a huge one that's still there. Florence has several. You ride around the countryside, there are farmers that plant grapes near old Roman aqueducts. It's crazy. Like, it's Italy just has, like, history in your face, right? So this is what we believe that the Forum of Augustus looked like. He added to the Forum and created this new segment of it called the Forum of Augustus. This is where actually whenever they would take over new parts of the empire, you were told to bring the treasure and things that you found inside of the empire and dump that in the floor so it could be, like, flaunted as the new, like, the treasury of Rome, right? It got so full of treasure at one point that it was almost impossible to walk through. That's how wealthy Rome was after Augustus. And this, of course, is the beautiful Pantheon, a religious temple designed by his buddy Marcus Agrippa that takes no management of keeping together. It's built by poured concrete in multiple different sections. It's not even made of pure marble. It is built in multiple sections, and it has a dome on the inside with an actual sunlight in it that shines at different areas of the Pantheon throughout the day. And that means that the entire dome had to be cast as one piece. That is insane. If you ever get a chance to go to Rome, you got to go see the Pantheon. It's absolutely beautiful, right? Also, following during the Pax Romana, even after Augustus was dead, new things were going to be added. This, of course, being the Colosseum. Oh. Also the Flavian Colossus, as it's known, right? So now, this gets built around 100 AD, right? So about, give or take, like 60 years after his death, right? So this beautiful, magnificent thing, of course, is the main sporting arena of Rome. This is what it looks like on the inside now, right? So this is what it would have looked like closer to when it was fully constructed. This is unfortunately what it looks like now. It looks like this now because, like we talked about with the Forum, because of stone thieves, right? After Rome falls during the Middle Ages, when Christians wanted to build new temples, they would go harvest the stone from inside of Roman relics like the Colosseum, right? And as you can see, the floor has been completely ripped out, right? You can actually see the tunnels where the gladiators used to walk in. How crazy is that? All right, so they actually used to walk in underground and they would be lifted up to the battle, like the playing field, where they would, not the playing field, but the battlefield where they would actually do their fights inside of there. And they also had like a lot of, and that's me, of course, standing in the Coliseum. All right, so anyway, no, they had a lot of other cool events there as well. They would have like jugglers that came out to warm up the crowd, and then they would have like magicians and stuff like that. Another really cool one is they would have these things known as beast hunts, where they would set up a fake forest or a fake natural setting inside the Coliseum itself, and then release wild animals out there that had been captured from other areas, and gladiators would have to go out there and hunt them, right? So, and also, this is some of the senatorial seats that are left behind. They sat on the front row seats on the marble because they were fancy. And then, of course, this is another view of the Colosseum in totality. The sand of the Colosseum, though, when it was actually built, was not this color. They used to dye it red so it would actually mask the blood of like some of the people that were fighting in it. Also, crazy thing as well, only about 25% of the gladiators that fought in the Colosseum actually died. So mainly because they're wildly expensive, right? Like a gladiator is a very expensive fighter. He's well trained. He is owned by someone usually because he's a slave. But they also had free men that would also fight in the gladiator games because they just wanted to prove their clout, right? Like former soldiers that thought they were awesome. But most of them were usually slaves. Some female gladiators actually existed as well. But only about 25% of them died, even though like the blood was soaked with sand. Also, the Colosseum was also a sad area too because it was a site of a lot of Christian executions, right? So a lot of Christians were actually fed to like lions and other massive animals like that inside of the Colosseum. But then the other crazy cool part of the Colosseum is inside of these little areas over to the side, water pumps were installed. They used to fill this thing with water and have naval battles. It's like the emperor's bathtub. He's just like, so like watching people have naval battles. And that's the wife when we were at the Colosseum. This is really cool too, because also these are things that people in the stands might have with them. This is crazy. This little guy right here, those are writing styluses. It was a very, very popular thing for Romans to carry around a writing stylus with them. So just in case they ever needed to actually use it to write something, they would actually use it. A lot of kids would get a hold of them. And in the seats of the Colosseum, they would use styluses to carve their names in the seats. Like kids would like vandalize the seats of the Colosseum, just like kids do now. I mean, like kids are kids, you know what I mean? Like they would even like draw little pictures of like the things they were seeing, the fights that were happening. And these are really cool too, because these are sticks that are actually associated with these guys. Those are stoves. People would sit in the seats of the Colosseum and cook food while they were waiting for the fights to start. Like they would bring meat from home, put it on these little skewers, make little fires right here, and like it would actually pull fresh air in from right here, and then like keep the fire going like right on top. And they're only about this big, right? They're very, very small. And like they would actually sit there and just roast meat over top of it and eat it inside the stands. How neat is that? So for years though, for years after Augustus, Rome is going to go through a lot of different good emperors and a lot of different bad emperors, right? So they went through a lot of bad ones more than any of the worst, any other ones. The worst of them are Caligula, right? So, and a guy named Nero. You just need to write these guys down, and then we're going to describe them a little bit on Monday. Or no, not Monday. I see you on Tuesday, Green and White Day, Tuesday. And then we're going to talk about the 5 worst emperors and the 5 good emperors, and then we're going to talk about the fall of Rome, and then we're going to wrap the whole thing up, right? And then we're going to get ready for your test on Thursday. So go ahead and get this down, but that's it. That's the Pax Romana and the Empire period following Augustus, and I hope you all have a great weekend. I'll see y'all then.